And guten Abend, meine Lieblinge, meine Hamburger. Good to see you all. And it is Sunday, December the 19th. I am Tad. You are other people, and that's all good. It's all good. I am going to be reading. We're having quite a weekend, of course. This is Deb's birthday weekend, so we just got back not too long ago from being out to dinner, which was very nice. And La Beale has gone to bed, as is often the case, before I start this particular late night version of the reading. But she had a good birthday dinner, and tomorrow is the actual birthday. So after I get done here, I've got to do some rapping, among other things. And I am not talking about Curtis Blow or Nas or, that kind of rapping, obviously. Just look at me. I am talking about the kind that has people putting paper around things. One of my very least favorite things to do. I really wish we could find a way to just get rid of the whole wrapping thing for good. Not because I'm against festivity. I mean, I am a bit grinchy, but it's not that I'm against festivity per se. It's more to do with the fact that it's a lot of work and it gets torn up and left on the floor, and then you have to gather it up, and it's a waste. I mean, I know it's an industry. I don't want people to lose their jobs, but lordy, lordy, what a massive amount of waste, as with so many other things in the human world that we live in these days. Anyway, so I'm in a good mood because it's my wife's birthday and she had a good time at her day before, since the restaurant we wanted to go to was closed on Sunday. We had the birthday dinner a night early, but that's okay. That was good. And as she said, she gets to command the weekend, which is, absolutely true. And she is enjoying it very much. So now I am going to be reading tonight. But what I'm going to do first, well, I'll wait a couple of minutes. Let me think if there's anything else that needs to be discussed as to things going on around our house. As mentioned, it's the holidays. I have a very ambivalent relationship with the holidays. I love my family. I love Christmas conceptually. It was always a big deal when I was a kid, and therefore that has carried over. And when our kids were small, it became a big deal again. Now that our kids are all in their 20s, it's a different kind of thing. But I still, have deep fondness for the season. But the combination of the season and all the things happening at this time of the year, and including Deb's birthday and several birthdays in November and various other things, and looming deadlines, means I'm slightly crazy. So I'm grinchier than I would normally be, I guess is the nice way to put it. By the way, I wonder sometimes if I'm the only person who really resents all the remakes because of the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, because the original, both the book itself and the amazing Chuck Jones animation from the 60s, are just perfect things. They are perfect things. And the film versions, first of all, they're, as always happens with, these beautiful works of children's art, books or whatever that are primarily meant for children. Well, when you stretch it out to make a feature-length film out of it, you just have to add a bunch of crap. And in fact, one of the reasons these things are often so damn good is because they are like poetry. Every little bit counts. And the Chuck Jones, this, for you folks in overseas or, not in America, you probably know the Grinch I'm talking about, but that's what I mean, is the famous animated version with the voiceover by Boris Karloff. It's one of those few nearly perfect things. It's just beautiful in its concision and its poetry, even though it's silly Dr. Seuss poetry. But I mean, it's perfect. And Chuck Jones was a brilliant, brilliant animator, and all the people who worked with him. And of course, some of his very best stuff was for Warner Brothers, for, Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny and, all that stuff. He was a genius. And it's not against Jim Carrey. I've got nothing against Jim Carrey, but it's like when you put a suit on somebody to make them look like a cartoon, and then you go for 2 hours and you invent subplots and all that stuff. I don't know. It just kind of, it depresses me. Not because the thing itself is bad, and some kids and stuff probably have watched the Grinch movies or whatever and gone, yeah, that's fine. I like the Grinch or whatever. But it's just like it obscures something truly fine. I don't know. But this is not a particularly original thought on my part. We all have our Christmas things that we love, or any kind of classic thing that we love, and we resent the versions that have come since, or the remakes or whatever. But it's certainly true that there are very few remakes that stand up to the originals. And, I'm sorry, but the Grinch is definitely one of them. Dr. Seuss was not somebody who you can just easily transfer into another medium and cram a bunch of other material into and have it still have the same impact. And that's been proved, unfortunately, through several feature-length films. Anyway, as usual, I'm wandering around, but that's Christmas time is, it's the most rerunning time of the year, and you've got everybody is running these, things over and over again that you see every year. And so, of course, you're thinking about them. I have my own personal favorites, but, anyway. Let me go down, see who's here, and say hello. There's Kristen. Hello, Kristen. Good to see you. Chris, hi-ho. Together from cold Lübeck. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm sorry that Lübeck is cold. It's not all that warm in California at the moment, although I realize when I'm talking about cold in California, I'm talking about a different thing than what most other people are going through. Cold. Excuse me. I think I swallowed a piece of mistletoe. Cold here is when it gets under 60 degrees Fahrenheit. When it gets under 50, it's Arctic as far as Californians are concerned. Deb was reflecting tonight. We were talking about places that we both really love, like Yorkshire, Lancashire, parts of Europe, and that would be fun to live in, except Deb said, I'm so Californian now. I'm not sure I could take the winters. I said, well, I always was Californian, so I certainly understand. Anyway, Chris, sorry Lübeck is cold. It's not that cold here, I'm sure. Wouter, hello, good evening. The newly re-locked down Netherlands, I know. I'm as frustrated as you are, believe me, because as I've told you guys many times, we have to be very, very cautious because our daughter is particularly susceptible to these things. So, the ongoing irritation of the whole COVID thing is, I'm not irritation. I mean, people die from it. It's a tragedy is what it is. But I mean, even for those of us who have not been sick, it's just, it's a continuous strain. Everybody is feeling very strained. So I said the other day to somebody, and I say this with full knowledge that it is a gross exaggeration, but I said, in a way, I think this is like our generation's wartime, not in the sense that, even the number of casualties is equivalent to something like the Second or First World War. But what I meant was it's one of those things which just is, and it goes on and it goes on. And so in a way, what I'm saying to myself is if my parents' and grandparents' generations could deal with these things, much more frightening, especially the Second World War, which, if the bad guys had won, who knows what kind of world we'd be living in now. Perhaps one quite a bit worse than the one we are living in. They got through, and they got through in part by just doing their best and taking care of each other. So that's kind of my feeling, is that's what we need to do, is just say, this may take a while. And if that's true, we're human beings. We adapt, and we will all adapt. But we're also human beings, so we're social animals. So we will take care of each other. At least most of us will. Anyway, who else is here? Anamika, good to see you. Holger, hello. Somewhat dull and gray Valdisru. Well, I will do my best to make it exciting and stimulating here, as I don't think I've mentioned yet, but this is actually some fairly exciting and stimulating bits coming up. Petra, hello. Jeremy, yes, you can now refer to me as Dr. Evil. Although I never finished college, so I guess I didn't even get a bachelor's degree. So I guess I'm high school evil. High school and junior college evil. I could be associate degree evil. So, anyway, so sorry, Jeremy, but that's what you brought up. I had to explain it. I cannot be Dr. Evil because I just have not done the work. Anyway, Holger, hello, hello. Mark, hello from cold and misty Yorkshire. Iris, good morning to you too. Hazel, hello, my darling. That is my mother-in-law, as I'm always mentioning. And there's Lisa, my sister-in-law. And love to both of you. I will certainly give Deb a big hug and say happy birthday. And of course, I'm sure she'd love to hear from you, even in an email or whatever. She's very surprised to have reached the advanced age that she has reached. So, as we all are, every time another birthday ticks over. So, who else have we got? I will give her a big kiss, a birthday kiss from you. Although, Lisa, I may use more tongue than you would have. Okay. What else have I got here? Dirk. Hello, Dirk. Good to see you. And Rosalba and Cliff. Good to see both of you folks. They're checking in separately. I don't mean to make it sound like they're checking in together. Ronnie, hello, good morning, and definitely better late than ever always. And Angela, good morning to you from a gray New Forest. Boy, this is evocative today. We're deep into winter now, aren't we? As a matter of fact, actually, we're only 2 days from the longest day of the year, which to us these days is more something that we sort of talk about. But being a fantasy writer, I'm always fascinated by the way things used to be, pre-industrial societies, all that kind of stuff, and trying to put myself in the mindset of what it must have been like back in prehistory, before we had calendars and things like that, when people were trying to understand the universe. And there was at least a sizable possibility, it seemed like, that, sometime the sun might go away and just not come back. And even though people probably felt at least there was a good chance that would happen, that the sun would come back and that the days would get long again, in a mysterious world. I mean, you look at how nutsy and freaked out some of us are sometimes over things like COVID or terrorism or, whatever, right? Well, we at least have, a grasp on who's doing those things and what the causes are and all that. Whereas 8,000 years ago, people had not much idea of why. That's what mythology is about. That's what folklore is about, is explaining things as to why the sun, goes away and is scarcely in the sky for several months, and why some days of the year are short. And, and this is where all these holidays come from, is a celebration but also a very devout hope that we will make it through, the Yule tree, all these things, these predate Christianity. The evergreens are symbols of eternal life. The candles light, it's the idea of the darkness not conquering. There's all these kinds of things that this time of the year is about. And I think it's very instructive and interesting to think about, we live such a mediated existence now. Nature to us is something to be indulged, visited, enjoyed maybe, but very much in a sense of like you can go to it, and unless you have rolled the dice on your life and have become a person who goes out to live off the land, of which there are some, there's always the feeling that we can escape from nature if we want to, if it gets too natural, if we get tired of, having to do all the things that you have to do just to stay alive, when you don't have houses and civilizations. So I find it a fascinating thing to think about this time of the year, how very mediated we are, and how our relationship with the world around us is so dramatically different from what we would have experienced, because human brains haven't changed that much. If you study history and study archaeology and anthropology and things like that, our ancestors I mean, the reason that we live in civilizations now and that we have science and we have tools and we have medicine is because our ancestors were really smart. They were smart creatures, and they couldn't necessarily see what everything was going to turn out to be. So they may have done some things or started some trends that now we're going like, wish we'd never started that as a species. But we definitely, we're here now because people were already smart 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago when agriculture started, all kinds of things. People figured things out and tried things and went, aha, this works. So never underestimate. The idea that Stone Age people were stupid is just the farthest thing from the truth. They basically were us. They just didn't have the wealth of infrastructure and experience of things and ways to store knowledge that we have. So everything had to be oral, everything had to be told, and information could only be learned in bits and pieces, But those people were smart. They were just as smart as us. Anyway, so I think we had just finished. Yes, we had just finished a chapter with Dredd, where Dredd had just been. This is John Dredd, who is the helper, the murderous helper of Felix Jongleur, and he had just been basically scolded by his boss. And he's thinking about how someday I'll get back at him. And that was the end of the last chapter. So we are now starting chapter 9 of Otherland, first volume, City of Golden Shadow. Here's a little trivia question. As with most of my stuff, there's just thousands and thousands of little bits and bobs floating around that are little nods or little what people in gaming would call Easter eggs. So chapter 9 is called Mad Shadows. So I'm throwing it open for any of you trivia buffs out there that might want to tell me where that title comes from. Mad Shadows. Okay, chapter 9. Netfeed, entertainment. Concrete Sun, highest rated for May. Visual, several explosions, man in white coat running. Voiceover. The series-ending episode of Concrete Sun was the most watched net entertainment for the month of May. Visual, man in white coat kissing one-legged woman. Appearing in 16% of homes worldwide. Visual, man in white coat carrying a bandaged dog through culvert. The story of a fugitive doctor hiding out in the squatter city of Bridge and Tunnel is the highest-rated linear drama in 4 years. Rini turned her head sharply, and the test pattern, an unending domino row of grids in contrasting colors, jiggled. She grimaced. A touch against one of the dimples on the side of her headset brought up the pressure in the padding. She waggled her head. Now the image stayed put. She lifted her hands, then curled her right index finger. The front grid, a simple lattice of glowing yellow, remained where it was. All the other grids moved a little farther apart from each other, rippling out into the indeterminate distance, one full lockstep into infinity. She bent the finger farther, and the distance between each grid shrank. She wagged the finger to the right, and the entire array rotated, each a fraction of an instant behind the one before it, so that a neon spiral formed and then vanished as the grids came to rest once more. "Now you do it," she told Kabu. He carefully wove his hands through a complex series of movements, each of which marked different points of distance and attitude from the sensor affixed to the front of his visor, like a third eye. The unending sequence of colored grids responded, spinning, shrinking, changing relationships like an exploding universe of square stars. Rini nodded in approval, even though Kabu could not see her. The test pattern and the all-surrounding blackness were the only visuals. "Good," she said. "Let's try out your memory. Take as many of those grids as you want, not from the front, and make a polyhedron." Kabu carefully withdrew his selections from the array. As the rest moved in to fill the vacated space, he stretched those he had chosen and folded them in half along the diagonal, then rapidly assembled the paired triangles into a faceted ball. "You're getting good," She was pleased. Not that she could take too much credit. She had never taught anyone who worked as hard as Kabu, and he had a tremendous natural aptitude. Very few people could adapt themselves to the unnatural rules of net space as quickly and completely as he had. "Then may I put this away now, Rini?" he asked. "Please? We have been preparing all morning." She flicked her hand and the test pattern disappeared. A moment later, they stood facing each other in a 360-degree ocean of gray, sim to unprepossessing sim. She bit back a nettled reply. He was right. She had been delaying, going over and over her preparations as though this were some kind of combat mission, instead of a simple trip into the inner district in search of information. Not that, strictly speaking, there was any such thing as a simple trip into inner district for outsiders like them. There might very well be barriers they could not pass, no matter how well prepared they were, but she didn't want to be unmasked and ejected because of some stupid preventable mistake. Also, if there was something illegal and dangerous going on in Toy Town, discovery of her investigation would put the guilty ones on guard and perhaps even lead them to destroy evidence that otherwise might save Stephen. "I did not intend to be rude, Rini." Kabu's sim lifted its simple hands in a gesture of peace. A rather mechanical-looking smile curled the corners of its mouth. "But I think that you too will be happier when we are doing something." "You're probably right. Disconnect and exit." Everything vanished. She lifted the visor on her headset, and the earnest but seedy ambiance of the Polly's harness room surrounded her once more. The bushman pushed up his own visor and blinked, grinning. Reflexively, she began one final run through her mental checklist. While Kabu had finished his exams, which, the grapevine told her, he had handled with expected ease, she had created not just aliases to get them into the inner district, but several backups as well. If things went badly, they could shuck off their first identities like old skin. But it had not been easy. Creating a false online identity was no different than creating one for real life, RL, and was in many ways the same process. Rini had spent a good portion of her time in the last few days hunting through backwater areas of the net. There were lots of vaguely unsavory people lurking in Lambda Mall's equivalent of dark alleyways, for whom setting up false identities was everyday work, but ultimately she had decided to do it herself. If her investigations of the inner district struck something important, the offended parties would go looking for the bootleg identity merchants first. Not a one of them would take a stand for privileged information when their livelihood, and perhaps even health, was at stake. By the way, if you see me smiling from time to time, you can't see it, but down on the floor there's the cat has a box that you can put treats in, and she has suddenly decided to go trying to get treats out of it right now, this moment. So there's all this scuff, thump, thump, thump scuffle going on. Anyway, so if you see me being distracted and amused, that's why. So, pumped up on caffeine and sugar, smoking an endless chain of theoretically non-carcinogenic cigarettes, she had set off to do a little akisu, as the old-timers called it. She had worked her way through hundreds of obscure infobanks, copying bits and pieces as it suited her, inserting false cross-check data on the systems whose defenses were outdated or weak enough. She had created a reasonably solid false identity for both of them, and, she hoped, even some insurance if things went very wrong. She had also learned a few things about Mr. J's along the way, which was one of the reasons she had been drilling Kabu all morning. The Inner District Club had a very dark reputation, and interfering with its operation might have some unpleasant real-world repercussions. Despite her initial impatience, she was glad Kabu had talked her into waiting for him. In fact, even another week to prepare wouldn't have gone amiss. She took a breath. Enough! If she weren't careful, she would turn into one of those obsessive compulsives who turned back 5 times to make sure the door was locked. "Okay," she said. "Let's get going." They made a few final tests of their harnesses, both of which hung from the ceiling by an arrangement of straps and pulleys that would allow their users freedom of movement in VR, as well as prevent them from walking into real walls or hurting themselves with a fall. When the pulleys had hauled them aloft, they dangled side by side in the middle of the padded room, like a pair of marionettes on the puppeteer's day off. Do what I say without questions. We can't afford to make mistakes. My brother's life could be at stake. I'll give you answers afterward. Rini checked one last time to make sure none of the wires would be worked loose by the action of the harness straps, then pulled her visor back down. The visuals flicked on, and the gray sparkle of the waiting net surrounded her. And remember, even though the closed band is provided by the inner district, not the club itself, once we get inside, you'd better assume that someone is listening. I understand, Rini. He sounded cheerful, which was amazing, considering that she had already given him the eavesdropper speech twice before that morning. She waved her hands, and they went. The crowd waiting at the interdistrict gateway was a brightly colored, noisy blur. As the clamor of their multilingual pleading thundered painfully in her ears, she realized that in her anxiety not to miss any possible clues, she had set the gain on her sensory inputs too high. A flick of the wrist and a circled finger brought them down to a manageable level. After a wait that had Rini bouncing in place with impatience, they at last slid to the front of the line. The female functionary was polite and seemed remarkably uninterested in making trouble. She examined their false identification, then asked if the reason for their visit, submitted as part of the ID package, was still correct. It is. I'm examining an installation we've had a complaint about. Rini's alias showed her working for a large Nigerian programming company, with Kabu as her trainee, a gear company which, she had discovered, kept very sloppy records. And how much time will you need, Mr. Otepi? Rini was astonished. Actual kindness. She was not used to tractability from net bureaucrats. She eyed the smiling Sim carefully, wondering if she were dealing with some new kind of hyper-actualized customer service puppet. It's hard to say. If the problem is simple enough, I may fix it myself. But first I must run it through its paces to find out. 8 hours? 8! She knew people who would pay several thousand credits for that long a period of access to the inner district. In fact, if she had any time left over when they finished, she was tempted to go find one of them. She wondered if she should try to get more. Maybe this puppet was broken, a slot machine that would just pay and pay, but decided not to press her luck. That should be adequate. A moment later they were through, floating just above ground level in monumental Gateway Plaza. You don't realize it, she told Kabu on their private band, but you've just witnessed a miracle. What is that? A bureaucratic system that actually does what it's supposed to do. He turned to her, a half-smile illuminating the face of the Sim Rini had arranged for the visit. Which is to let in 2 disguised people who are pretending to have legitimate business? Nobody likes a comedian, she pointed out, then exited from the private band. We are clear. We can go anywhere we want now, except private nodes. Kabu surveyed the plaza. The crowd seemed different here than in the Lambda Mall, and the structures are more extreme. That's because you're closer to the center of power. People here do what they want because they can afford to. A thought came swirling up like a flake of hot black ash. People who can get away with anything, or think they can. Stephen was comatose in the hospital, while the men who had hurt him enjoyed their freedom. Her anger, never completely cold, rekindled. Let's go have a look around Toy Town. Lullaby Lane was far more crowded than the last time she had been there, almost choked with virtual bodies. Caught by surprise, Rini pulled Kabu into an alley so she could figure out what was happening. The crowd flowed past the alley mouth in one direction, shouting and singing. It seemed to be a parade of sorts. The Sims were embodied in a variety of bizarre ways: oversized, undersized, extra-limbed, even divided into unconnected body parts that moved like coherent wholes. Some of the revelers shifted and changed even as she watched. One violet-haired, attenuated figure wore enormous bat wings, which dissolved into traceries of fluttering silver gauze. Many reformed themselves every few moments, extruding new limbs, changing heads, spreading and curling into fantastic shapes like boiling wax dumped in cold water. "Welcome to Toy Town," she thought. "Looks like we arrived just in time for a reunion of the Hieronymus Bosch Society." She took the bushmen up to rooftop level where they could get a better view. Several in the crowd bore glowing banners proclaiming "Freedom!" or spelled it out above their heads in fire. One group had even turned themselves into a walking row of letters that spelled out "Mutation Day." Although most of the paraders' Sims were extreme by design, they were also rather unstable. Some of them fell apart into unstructured planes and lines in a way that did not look intentional. Others flickered in mid-step and occasionally disappeared entirely. Home-cooked programming, she decided. Do-it-yourself stuff. "It's a protest, I think," she told Kabu. "Against what person or thing?" He hung in the air beside her, a cartoon figure with a serious expression on its simple face. "Embodiment laws, I would guess. But they can't be suffering much if they can afford to hang out here in the first place." She made a small noise of contempt. "Rich people's children, complaining because their parents won't let them dress up. Let's go." They beamed past the procession to the far end of Lullaby Lane, where the streets were empty. Without the distraction of street theater, the run-down quality of the neighborhood was immediately apparent. Many of the nodes seemed to have grown even more decrepit since her last visit. Both sides of the street were lined with skeletal, colorless buildings. A distant, skittery flare of music at last turned them toward a garish glow at the street's far end. In such dim surroundings, the awful, throbbing liveliness of Mr. J's seemed even more sinister. Kabu stared at the turreted sprawl and the giant carnivorous grin. "So that is it?" "Private band," Rini snapped. "And keep it there, unless you have to answer a question from someone. As soon as you finish answering, switch back. Don't worry about being slow to respond. I'm sure they get lots of people in that place whose reflexes are not what they should be." They slowly floated forward, watching the club's facade gleam and squirm. "Why are there no people about?" asked Kabu. "Because this isn't a part of the inner district that invites much sightseeing. People who come to Mr. J's probably beam in directly. Are you ready?" "I believe so. Are you?" Rini hesitated. The question seemed flippant, but that was not the bushman's way. She realized she was wound tight and hard, her nerves thrumming. She took several deep breaths, willing herself toward calm. The toothy mouth over the doorway flapped its red lips as though whispering a promise. Mr. Jingo's Smile, this place had been called. Why did they change the name but keep that horrid grimace? "It is a bad place," Kabu said abruptly. "I know. Don't forget that for a second." She splayed her fingers. An instant later, they were in a shadowy antechamber, a place with gold-framed carnival mirrors instead of walls. As she turned to survey the room, Rini could see that the latency, the tiny lag between initiation and action that characterized complex VR environments, was very low here, a quite passable mimicry of real life. The detail work was also impressive. Alone in the antechamber, they were not alone in the mirrors. 1,000 reveling ghosts surrounded them, figures of men and women, as well as some more animal, than human, all cavorting around the distorted reflections of their two Sims. Their reflections appeared to be enjoying themselves. "Welcome to Mr. J's." The voice spoke oddly accented English. There was no image to match it in any of the mirrors. Rini turned to discover a tall, smiling, elegantly dressed white man standing close behind them. He lifted his gloved hands and the mirrors disappeared, leaving the three of them alone in a single pillar of light surrounded by infinite black. "So nice to have you with us." His voice crept in close as though he whispered in her ear. "Where are you from?" "Lagos," said Rini a little breathlessly. She hoped her own voice, processed an octave lower to match her masculine alias, did not sound as squeaky to him as it did to her. We've heard a lot about this place." The man's smile widened. He made a short bow. "We are proud of our worldwide reputation and pleased to welcome friends from Africa. You are, of course, of legal age." "Of course." Even as she spoke, she knew that digital fingers were prying at the edge of her alias, but not prying too hard. Deniability was all that a place like this needed. "I am showing my friend here some inner district sites. He's never been here before." "Splendid. You have brought him to the right place." The well-dressed man was finished distracting them, which meant their indexes had been passed. He made a theatrical flourish, and a door opened in the darkness, a rectangular hole that bled smoky red light. Noise spilled out, too. Loud music, laughter, a wave crash of voices. "Enjoy your visit," he said. "Tell your friends." Then he was gone, and they were flowing forward into the scarlet glow. The music reached out to gather them in like the pseudopod of some immense but invisible energy creature. Blaringly loud, it sounded like the bouncy swing jazz of the previous century. But it had strange hiccups and slurs, secret rhythms moving deep inside like the heartbeat of a stalking predator. It was captivating. Rini found herself humming along before she could even make out words, but those came quickly enough. "There's no call for consternation," someone was singing urgently as the orchestra wailed and stomped in the background. "A smiling face is invitation enough. No bluff. So bring your stuff to the celebration." The lounge was impossibly huge, a monstrous red-lit octagon. The pillars that marked its angles, each one broad as a skyscraper, stretched up to disappear in shadow far above. The vertical rows of lights that trimmed them grew closer together, and at last shrank into continuous lines of radiance as distance squeezed them. Up where even those lights failed, up in the unspeakable heights of the ceiling, sparking fireworks zigged and caromed endlessly against the blackness. Spotlights wheeled through the smoky air, pushing fast-moving ellipses of brighter red across the velvet walls. Hundreds of booths sprawled between the pillars and filled the ringing balconies, which circled up at least a dozen floors before the swirling clouds of smoke made counting impossible. An almost endless mushroom forest of tables covered the shiny main floor, with silver-clad figures speeding between them like pinballs off bumpers. 1,000 waiters and waitresses, 2,000, more, all moving swiftly and frictionlessly as beads of mercury. In the center of the enormous room, the orchestra stood on a floating stage that sparkled and revolved like a sideways Ferris wheel. The musicians wore black and white formal suits, but there was nothing formal about them. They were cartoonishly attenuated and two-dimensional. As the music squalled, their shapes wavered and flared like mad shadows. Some grew until their rolling eyes peered directly into the highest balconies. Bright tombstone teeth snapped at the customers, who shrieked and laughed even as they scrambled for safer ground. Only the singer, perched at the farthest edge of the circling stage in a filmy white dress, did not change size. As the shadowy musicians billowed around her, she glowed like a piece of radium. "So toss away your trepidation," she sang, her voice harsh yet somehow alluring, its quaver that of a child forced to stay up too late, watching the adults grow strange and drunken. "Slip into some syncopation, no fuss. The bus will propel us to the party station." The singer was only a spot of light in the midst of the cyclopean lounge and the crazily stretching orchestra, but for long moments Rini found that she could not see anything else. Huge black eyes and a pale face made the woman look almost skeletal. Her fountain of white hair, half as tall as she was, combined with the white dress rippling beneath her arms, to make her seem some kind of exotic bird. "Sit right down, lose that frown, mingle with the toast of Toy Town, pick a song, sing along, all that's upright will turn out wrong." The singer swayed back and forth, buffeted by the pounding beat like a dove in gale winds. The great eyes were closed now in something that might be exultation but didn't seem like it. Rini had never seen a human being look quite so trapped, and yet the singer glowed, burned. She might have been a light bulb channeling too much juice, her filament an instant away from explosive collapse. Slowly, almost unwillingly, Rini reached out for Kabu. She found his hand and closed her fingers on it. "Are you okay?" "It is quite overwhelming, this place. It is. Let's sit down for a moment." She led him across the floor to one of the booths along the far wall, an RL journey that would have taken some minutes on foot, but which they made in seconds. All the musicians in the orchestra were singing now, clapping and hooting and stamping their mighty feet on the rocking stage. The music was so loud that it seemed the whole gigantic house might fall down. "Free your heart of hesitation, Eves and Adams of every nation state. Feel great when they create a federation." The music swelled and the spotlights raced even faster, beams flickering across each other like fencers' foils. There was a cannon fire rattle of drums, a last explosive blare of horns, then the orchestra was gone. A hollow chorus of hoots and cheers wafted through the immense room. Rini and Kabu had barely sunk into the deep velvet banquette when a waiter appeared before them, floating a few inches off the floor. He wore a chrome-colored, form-fitted tuxedo. His sim body appeared to have been modeled after some ancient fertility deity. "Zazoon creepers," he drawled. "What'll it be?" We can't eat or drink in these sims," Rini said. "Do you have anything else?" He gave her an intensely knowing and slightly amused look, clicked his fingers, and vanished. A menu of glowing letters hung in the air behind him, like a luminescent residue. "There's a list labeled emotions," Kabu said wonderingly. "Sorrow, mild to intense. Happiness, tranquil contentment to violent joy. Fulfillment, misery, optimism, despair, pleasant surprise, madness." He looked at Rini. "What are these? What do they mean?" "You can speak on public band. No one will be surprised that this is new to you, or to me for that matter. Remember, we are just a couple of backwoods boys from Nigeria, come to the virtual big city to see the sights." She changed over. "I suppose these are sensations that they simulate. Eddie, that fellow we know, told us that they could give you sensory experiences your equipment wasn't wired for, or they claim they can." "What should we do now?" In the midst of the immense room, the bushman's small sim looked even smaller, as though squeezed by the very weight of clamor and movement. "Where do you wish to go?" "I'm thinking." She stared at the fiery letters hanging before them, a curtain of words that offered little privacy and no protection. "I'd like it to be a little less noisy, actually, if we can afford it, that is." It was still the same booth, but its colors had become muted, earth tones, and it now sat in a small room along the quiet gallery. The arched doorway looked out on a wide blue pool set in the middle of stone cloisters. "This is beautiful," said Kabu. "And we came here just like that." He snapped his sim fingers, but they made no noise. "And the money is flowing out of our account just like that, too. This has to be the only club in the VR world where it costs less to rent a back room than to turn down the noise at your table. I suppose they want to encourage people to use the services." Rini straightened herself. The pool was mesmerizing. Drops fell from the mossy ceiling, making circular ripples that spread and overlapped, throwing blurry reflections back against the torchlit walls. "I want to look around. I want to see what the rest of this place is like. Can we afford to?" She flicked to private band. "I put some credits in the account that goes with this alias, but not many. They don't pay teachers that well. But we're only paying for this because we requested it. If we just wander around, well, I think they have to warn us before they charge our account." Kabu's face stretched in a sim smile. "You think the people who own this place capable of many things, but you do not suspect them of cheating their customers?" Rini didn't like discussing what she thought them capable of, even on private band. "No one stays in business if they cheat everybody. That's a fact. Even one of those Brotherbund-owned clubs on the Victoria Embankment, they may take a bit off the top and deal to chargeheads and drug addicts in the back, but they still have to keep up pretenses." She stood and switched back over. "Come on, let's have a look around." As she and Kabu stepped through the arch onto the walkway that ringed the pool, a light began to glow deep beneath the placid waters. "That way." She moved toward it. "But—" Kabu took a step after her, then stopped. "It's all illusion. Remember that. And unless they've abandoned the universal VR interface symbols, that shows us the way out." She took another step and hesitated, then bent her knees and dove. The descent took a long time. Back at the Poly, her real body was being held horizontally in harness, so she had no physical sensation of falling. But here in the quiet gallery, she saw the glowing blue translucence come up to meet her, then saw her own splash create a vortex of bubbles around her. A circle of light glowed in the deeps. She headed toward it. A moment later, Kabu was beside her. Unlike Rini, who had mimicked the head-forward, arms-outstretched posture of a diver, he sank downward while standing upright. "What?" he began, then laughed. "We can talk? It's not water, and those aren't fish." Kabu chortled again as a great cloud of shimmering forms surrounded them, tails flicking, fins whirring like tiny propellers. One, its scales striped in bold patterns of black, yellow, and red, swam backward in front of the bushman, its nose almost touching his. "Wonderful," he said, and reached toward it. The fish spun and darted away. The doorway still glowed, but the water around them seemed to be getting darker. They had moved through into some other level of the pool, or rather of the simulation. Rini could see what looked like sea floor below, rocks and white sand and waving forests of kelp. She even thought she saw a glimpse of something almost human sheltering in the forest's shadow-tangled depths, something with hands and fingers and bright eyes, but with the muscular tail of an ocean predator. Behind the splashing noises pumped into her earplugs was a deeper noise, a kind of singing. She found it disturbing. With a gesture, she hurried them to the gleaming exit. Up close, the ring was revealed to be a wreath of shining circles, each a different color. "Pick one," she told Kabu. He gestured, and the red ring glowed more brightly. A calm, genderless voice murmured, "Inferno and other lower chambers," into their ears. Kabu glanced at her. She nodded, despite the sudden tingle of unease up the back of her neck. That would be the kind of place that would lure young boys like Stephen. Kabu touched the ring again, and the whole wreath of circles turned molten red, then expanded, flowing over and past them, so that for a moment they were in a tunnel of crimson light. When the glare had faded, they were still underwater, although it now had a murkier cast. Rini at first thought that the gateway had malfunctioned. "Up there," said Kabu, pointing. Far above them hung another circle of light, this one a solid disk of red, like a dying sun. "That is what the sky looks like from deep beneath the water." He sounded a little breathless. "Then let's go." She wondered briefly what Kabu, a native of the shallow delta rivers and marshes, knew about deep water, then dismissed it. Maybe he'd been swimming in the Durban public pools. They rose toward the red light, floating through more seaweed forests. These were black and thorny, drifting clumps of water brambles that sometimes blocked their view of the circle entirely and cast them into a strange undersea twilight. The water was cloudy, agitated by the steam vents which bubbled on the jagged ocean floor below them. All sign of where they had entered was gone, although she felt sure that if she and Kabu reversed direction, some indication of the route back into the quiet gallery pool would appear. The route, excuse me. She fingered one of the barbed strands of kelp, marveling anew at how its rough, rubbery texture could be manufactured from unphysical numbers, and yet, when transmitted to the tactors, the force feedback sensors in the glove of her sim suit give every impression of palpable existence. Kabu reached out and snatched at her arm, jerking her sideways. "See!" He sounded genuinely panicked. She looked down, following his pointing finger. Something vast and dark was moving in the steaming depths. Rini could vaguely make out a smooth back and a strangely elongated head that seemed too big for the body, sliding along the rocky bottom near the spot where they had entered. The creature looked like some cross between a shark and a crocodile, but was far larger than either. The long cylindrical body disappeared into the murk a dozen yards behind the questing muzzle. "It smells us!" She took his hand in hers and squeezed. "It's not real," she said firmly, although her own heart was beating very fast. The thing had ceased nosing at the vents and had begun lazily to move upward, its rising circular path taking it out of sight for the moment. She changed to private band. "Kabu, feel my hand. That's my real hand, under my glove. Our bodies are in the harness room at the Poly. Remember that." The eyes of Kabu's sim were shut tight. Rini had seen this before. A terrifying experience in a high-quality simulation could be just as overwhelming as in real life. She kept a tight grip on her friend's hand and accelerated their rise. Something huge rushed through the spot they had just occupied, immense and swift as a maglev train. Her heart lurched. She had a brief glimpse of a gaping mouth full of teeth and a glinting eye as big as her head. Then the dark, shiny body was passing endlessly beneath them. She added more speed to their upward movement, then chided herself for doing just what she had warned Kabu against, using RL logic. "Just jump out, you fool. This isn't water, so you don't have to swim. Simulation or not, do you really want to find out what happens when that thing catches people?" She gestured with her free hand, and the red disk expanded dramatically. The surface seemed to fling itself down toward them. An instant later, they were bobbing on a wide and unsettled lake in a chaos of steam and red rain. Still caught up in the experience, Kabu floundered, thrashing his arms in an attempt to stay afloat, though at that moment Rini's control, rather than his own movements, determined his position. A great shiny hump broke the surface, moving rapidly toward them. Rini squeezed Kabu's hand again and moved them instantaneously to the lakeshore, 200 yards distant. But there was no shore. The crimson-lit water splashed against black basalt walls and then flowed up, hissing and boiling in great sheets, to the stalactite-studded ceiling before drizzling back down in a continuous smoking rain. Almost blinded, Rini and Kabu hung in place at the lake's edge, being violently bumped against painfully well-simulated stone. The hump splashed up into view again, and this time kept rising until the head towered above the roiling steam as it wove from side to side, searching for its prey. Rini bobbed in place for a moment, stunned. What she had thought was a gigantic body was only the thing's neck. The head moved closer, sluicing water like a dredging crane. Leviathan, she thought, remembering her mother's Bible readings, and felt a moment of superstitious fear, followed by a wave of hysterical mirth at the thought that a simple VR entertainment should surprise her so badly. The laughter died when Kabu's hands clutched at her shoulders and neck. Her friend was panicking. "It's not real!" she shouted, trying to make herself heard over the roar of the boiling waters and the bubbling wheeze of the approaching beast. But the bushman was caught up in his own private terror and did not hear her. The vast maw opened, looming through the spattering rain. Rini contemplated pulling the plug on the whole expedition, but they had learned nothing yet. Alarming though it was, this sort of thing was a roller coaster ride for kids like Stephen. Whatever had struck him down was nothing so obvious. The walls of the great cavern were covered with upward flowing cataracts, but there were dozens of places where crimson light gleamed through the sheets of water as though there were open spaces beyond. Rini picked one at random and moved them to it, even as the beast plunged its head downward, snapping at the emptiness where they had floated a moment before. As they sped toward the glowing spot, Rini saw that the cavern walls were lined with human forms, mouths agape, all writhing slowly just beneath the churning waters as though they had been partially absorbed by the stone. Fingers pushed through the cataracts, clawing toward her. The ceiling-bound water frothed from the stretching hands and dripped upward like strings of floating jewels. Rini and Kabu splashed through a curtain of water and fell forward onto a stone walkway as Leviathan's disappointed bellow shook the walls. And I'm trying to see if there's a good place to break. Actually, sadly, no. That's really the only good place to break. So, it's a long chapter, but there's still several pages left. Not something I could get through tonight without going another 20 minutes. Sorry if I'm mumbling here, folks. My brain is small. It's small but active, not unlike a hamster in a wheel. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up there tonight, and I will continue tomorrow night and recorded, obviously, for those of you who want to hear the rest of Rini and Kabu's adventures in Mr. J's, including, I believe, don't we get to the yellow room here? I think we see the yellow room, which is pretty creepy, but yes, of course. Yes, so we get to see all kinds of interesting, disturbing things. But it is 2:00, so I should wrap it up. I'll try not to talk so long next Sunday early morning when I have this group, because these are long. This is a long book. Although we're a respectable amount through already. We're about a fifth or a sixth of the way through it. So anyway, but I want to thank you as always for joining me. Thank you very much also for all the birthday wishes for Deb. I will point them out to her so she can go and read them herself. I want to see, did anybody answer my trivia question? Oh God, this is going to be one of those things where where they're going to mess around with the. I don't see anybody trying to answer that. I wonder if anybody knows what Mad Shadows is. Well, I'll leave it, and if somebody knows, they can always drop me a message on my Facebook page or on my Twitter page as to what the chapter title comes from. Actually, many of my chapter titles in general are in some shape or form are little, as I said, they're little Easter eggs, although I was writing a lot of these long before I knew that particular term of Easter egg. So they're worth looking at because some of them are definitely references to things outside of the books or things that are significant or interesting to me. Anyway, but I suddenly realized now next Sunday morning and Sunday night, I believe, is actually Christmas. Well, Saturday is Christmas Day, but Saturday rolls over into Christmas Eve for me. So watch the, that's right, it's the 19th, so it's 6 days till Christmas. So watch the announcements, because I don't know yet what's going to be happening on Christmas. And actually, now that I think about it, I think we're doing, our family dinner is going to be on Boxing Day this year, so next Sunday may not work out for me to do any reading. So I will formally put something up on my social media pages to let you know, but don't count on any reading next week because it will be essentially Christmas, and most of you probably have other things to do anyway. So most of you probably weren't sitting there going, "Oh God, I hope Tad reads," but you're probably thinking instead, "Oh God, I hope I don't have to humor Tad on Christmas." So anyway, so probably not going to do readings next week, but I will definitely be back the next week because I think it's on New Year's Day night, the night of New Year's Day, not New Year's Eve. And let me double check that as well here while I'm at it. Yes, exactly. No, so Sunday is actually the 2nd. So that won't be an issue. And we never do anything for New Year's anyway. So with that, don't expect to see anything next week. So those of you who celebrate Christmas, have a lovely Christmas. Those of you who celebrate anything else, including Kwanzaa, because I probably won't get a chance to get to you before then, happy Kwanzaa, happy whatever you happen to celebrate, or nothing if you don't celebrate anything. Just be glad that the sun will come back and that it's that time of the year. My focus won't come back, but the sun will. And I say thank you again for joining me, and be good to yourselves, be good to each other, be good to the folks around you, your loved ones, your neighbors. It's life during wartime. We will get through this, and we will get out the other side. So that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you. Very kind of you. Peace. Happy holidays. And I will be in communication. I hope you all have a good rest of